legs, your personal possessions inside the vehicle at all times. Please refrain from smoking or vaping. And as this is a narrated tour, we do kindly ask that you keep your personal conversations and your cell phone use to a minimum as a courtesy to fellow guests. Thank you so much. As we exit the parking lot in front of the old jail, let me draw your attention over here in the far right-hand corner just beneath the flagpoles. Look for that black iron rail car stenciled on it, old jail, and the date 1916. Back in the day, it was pulled by oxen. Perhaps the first trolley ride at St. Augustine. What do you think? No, not even close. But it was used by the sheriff's deputies to transport the prisoners from the old jail out into the chain gangs. They worked under the hot Florida sun until the job was done, sometimes a week, sometimes longer. But each night the prisoners would return back to the comfort of their iron bunks inside that rail car they considered their home away from home. Now, as we head down to the historic district, what I'd like to do from here is start at the very beginning of our colonial past. Let me take you back to the year 1493. Christopher Columbus had a second voyage to the New World that year, and he had on board with him a gentleman explorer, Spanish nobility by the name of Don Juan Ponce de Leon. Ponce de Leon would return, serve as the first governor of Puerto Rico, and then he went searching for new lands and new treasures for the Spanish crown. Some say he went looking for something called the Fountain of Youth he had trouble locating. But frankly, I don't know how he could miss it. There's a great big red illuminated sign here telling him where to go to find it. But all joking aside, we'll be down there later in our tour for our important stop, the Archaeological Park and the Fountain of Youth, where Ponce de Leon came ashore Easter Sunday, 1513. Now, the Easter season in Spain is known as the Feast of Flowers, or Pascua de Flores. So that explains why he named what he thought he discovered as an uncharted island, La Florida, and claimed it for Spain. But as you know, Florida's not an island at all. The landmass extends all the way up to present-day Canada, west to the Mississippi River. Thousands of Indians living here at the time of his arrival. But what Ponce de Leon managed to discover, very important to the Spanish Empire, of course, was the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream would enable those Spanish galleon ships laden with silver and gold to return home from the New World and cut that voyage by as much as 2 weeks. But what Ponce de Leon managed to discover, very important to the Spanish Empire, of course, was the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream enabled those Spanish galleon ships laden with silver and gold to return home from the New World and cut that voyage by as much as 2 weeks. Try as they might to establish a permanent colony here in La Florida, Spain wasn't able to do so for about 50 more years. In fact, it wasn't until after the French Huguenots established a colony north of here near present-day Jacksonville. They named it Fort Caroline after their French King Charles, and when King Philip II of Spain learned of this news, he became so angry he would send over his best Captain General of the day, Don Pedro Menendez de Alvarez, to establish a permanent colony here once and for all. The Great Cross you see standing out here on the left-hand side out on the mission grounds, Mission Nombre de Dios, meaning the name of God. We'll be back here later in our tour for an important stop. This great cross marks the spot where Pedro Menendez came ashore to establish the colony of St. Augustine, September 8, 1565, after a dreadful and deadly voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. You see, Menendez had departed Cadiz, Spain with 11 ships and a complement of 1,500 aboard his Armada. When he arrived here on September 8th, he only had 5 of those ships remaining, about 800 souls that survived the journey. He first spotted land somewhere down the present-day Florida coastline on August 28th. August 28th on the Catholic calendar is when we celebrate the feast day of St. Augustine of Hippo. So that explains how we got our name. When he came ashore here 11 days later, he named the colony after his patron saint and doctor of the church, St. Augustine. Now, the Spanish arrived here just in time as there was a major hurricane brewing out in the Atlantic Ocean that would have a dramatic impact on this first chapter of our colonial past. Despite all the hardships, loss of life, and terrible weather, shortly after he landed, Menendez set about to do exactly what his king instructed. Taking his troops, he marched them north through the swamps to attack the French up at Fort Caroline. But when he got up there, he saw that the fort was not well defended. Somehow the French received word Menendez was on his way over here from Spain. They wanted to attack him in open waters. So they took their warships with their soldiers aboard, headed out to the Atlantic Ocean from Fort Caroline, tried to circle in behind the Spanish and do battle there. Bad decision by the French. They sailed right into that same hurricane. They were blown way off course and shipwrecked south of here, somewhere near present-day Port Canaveral. Meanwhile, Menendez captures Fort Caroline without much of a struggle before returning south. first to check on the safety of this new colony, then he continued down the coastline, rounded up all those French Huguenot soldiers about 12 miles south of here, put them to the sword, and that was the end of the French Huguenot. 21 years later, the Protestants got their revenge. Sir Francis Drake came through here with 2,000 soldiers, chasing the Spanish defenders into the swamps, burning everything in sight. After that attack, the Spanish understood if they're going to hold on to this important colony, they'd have to fortify it. They started to build walls around it. And coming into view directly in front of us in a few moments, you will see all the remains of the northern town wall, our city gate, guarding at one time the only entrance into St. Augustine from the north, right down through the center of today's St. George Street. Now, originally, the city gate was made out of wood and palm logs. In 1808, the Spanish rebuilt it using a material we still call coquina. Coquina is a composite of sand, a fossilized shell, and lime. The Spanish quarried out on Anastasia Island to build their permanent structures here, like the fort you see way out there to our left. We'll visit later in the tour. In the meantime, we're pulling into Orange Street, inside where the northern town wall once stood. In a few moments, you'll see a fabricated line of palm logs here on the right-hand side, representing a section of what the Spanish called the Cuba line, defending against any attack from the north. And if we were to make a left-hand turn up at this next intersection, we'd be traveling alongside where the western town wall once stood, 10 to 12 feet in height, made out of earthworks and palm logs, the Spanish called the Rosario line. Now, we've lost that western town wall to history, but we have been able to recreate one of the 9 wooden forts that once stood here on the Presidio of St. Augustine. Across the street on the right-hand side, you'll see a replica of the Santo Domingo Redoubt, which once stood at the intersection of the 2 town walls. And here on the left-hand side, the authentic old drugstore and Potter's Wax Museum. That's a good example of a cracker house. It's never been painted. Cedar and cypress do a great job naturally repelling moisture and insects. This house was built by a man by the name of T.W. Speichinger. Came here to make his fortune in the orange juice business, considered to be liquid gold. Then he realized it took about 10 years for an orange grove to develop, and he had a family to feed, so he reverted to his earlier trade in apothecary. You know, in those days, if you're not feeling well, you don't need a prescription. Just walk into the drugstore, the chemist will mix up a cocktail made out of wood grain alcohol, citrus water, perhaps a little opium. Didn't cure what ailed you, but there's a very good chance you'll feel a heck of a lot better by the time you left the drugstore than when you went in. And no kidding, do you know where you get the opium from in those days? You could order it directly from the Montgomery Ward's catalog. How about that? Well, pulling into stop number 3, we've been told by the city to skip stop number 2 because the parking lot garage has a backup that's going to stop us from getting around it. So we're going to tell you where the parking garage and the Visitors Information Center is. We really didn't miss it. It's just on across the street or on the other side. But you can go face to face with history here, my friends. Over 150 wax figures, some of them now nearing 75 years old, inside Potter's Wax Museum, the oldest wax museum in the United States.